you can follow. Jews should follow the whole package. But those who are not Jewish can partake of the redemption of Christ without having to become Jewish. Now, to us, that's a no-brainer. That's obvious. That was the source of immense conflict and controversy. Very often, in the Acts of the Apostles, when Paul is fighting with, quote, the Jews, many times he is fighting with Jewish Christians. And it is about who could be admitted to the table fellowship of Christians, namely the Eucharist. Now, that was a real big problem because the Jewish Christians would very often say, well, okay, they can follow Christ, that's fine, but we're not going to celebrate Eucharist with them. And Paul said, Christ is not divided. Christ is one. How can you not celebrate Eucharist with them? Well, at that time, Eucharist was in the context of a meal. Well, they knew very well why, and he knew very well why too, because they might bring in some non-kosher food, and that would defile us. So that was the substance, really, of that conflict, and it was a serious, serious conflict at that time, and it went on a little bit. If you go to Antioch, there's a couple of things that you would want to see. The main one is a cave up on the side of the mountain called St. Peter's Grotto. And that facade to the cave was actually built by the Crusaders. But this is the place that everybody tells the tourists was the place where Christians met and hid from the Romans and celebrated their Eucharist and all of that. And it's a nice story for tourists. We were very, very fortunate, actually, on our last pilgrimage, because that tourist place, St. Peter's Grotto, was closed because of a landslide. We couldn't get up there. We were going to have Mass there. Our tour guide brought us to the Catholic Church in Antioch, which is a church of St. Peter and St. Paul, right downtown. And it is probably much closer to what the original type of church really was for the Christians of Antioch. It was simply a house. It was actually an Ottoman Turkish house built over 100 years ago that somebody sold to them or gave to them. They refurbished it to be a church. It was a very nice church. And we celebrated our Mass here. Kind of a, modern decorated church. But this is the way Christians gathered in those times, not up at the cave. Here's an overall view of the city. And we've really already talked about this, so we don't have to worry about that one. Now, Paul with his journeys, this is really interesting. That was a system of Roman roads in the time of St. Paul. And this is one reason why I don't call our pilgrimage the footsteps of St. Paul. To go in the footsteps of St. Paul, you'd have to walk 10,000 miles. Thank you very much. Minimum of 10,000 miles. I personally think he probably walked closer to 20,000 because not everything is recorded in the Acts of the Apostles. And he probably went at least 5,000 miles, maybe more, by ship. How did Paul teach? This is really important for the understanding of Paul. We have no record of his teaching style. His letters, certainly the content focused on the meaning of the crucified and risen anointed one, the Christ of the Jews, as Lord and Savior of all people. Notice the thing here. The Messiah of the Jews, the Christ of the Jews, is Lord and Savior of all people. Lord and Savior is an interesting expression because that's what people called the Roman emperor. the Lord, the Kyrios, and the Savior, the Soter. The Roman emperor was the Lord and Savior of his people. And Paul's message was, no, the crucified and risen Christ is the Lord and Savior of all people. Quite a proclamation. I mean, everything that Paul wrote is unpacking that. Unpacking it. Now, undoubtedly his teaching was very personal and was in dialogue, in conversation. There isn't much indication he was a storyteller like Jesus was. But remember this. This is really important. You do not get the teaching of St. Paul primarily in the letters. Or I should say, we have to get the teaching of St. Paul primarily in the letters. But they were not intended primarily as teaching. His letters were problem-solving. He had already taught the communities he wrote to. And then when he went on, he gets word that there's a problem there. And he writes his letters in order to straighten them out, to recall some of his teaching, and to tell them, this is what you have to do in order to be faithful to the word that I have already given you. So his letters are primarily problem-solving, not primarily teaching, which is an interesting challenge for us, because we can't expect his letters, therefore, we can't expect his letters to be a summary of what he taught. But rather, they're all we've got. So we've got to kind of glean what he taught from those letters, but that wasn't their primary purpose.